A flight attendant, also known as steward, stewardess or air host, air hostess, is a member of the aircrew aboard commercial flights, many business jets and some government aircraft. Collectively called cabin crew, flight attendants are primarily responsible for passenger safety and comfort. The role of a flight attendant derives from that of similar positions on passenger ships or passenger trains, but it has more direct involvement with passengers because of the confined quarters on aircraft. Additionally, the job of a flight attendant revolves around safety to a much greater extent than those of similar staff on other forms of transportation. Flight attendants on board a flight collectively form a cabin crew, as distinguished from pilots and engineers in the cockpit. The German Heinrich Kubus was the world's first flight attendant. In 1912, Kubus first attended the passengers on board the Delag Zeppelin LZ-10 Schwabane. He also attended to the famous LZ-129 Hindenburg and was on board when it burst into flames. He survived by jumping out a window when it neared the ground. Origins of the word steward in transportation are reflected in the term chief steward, as used in maritime transport terminology. The term purser and chief steward are often used interchangeably describing personnel with similar duties among seafaring occupations. This lingual derivation results from the international British maritime tradition dating back to the 14th century and the civil and United States merchant marine on which U.S. aviation is somewhat modeled. Due to international conventions and agreements, in which all ships' personnel who sail internationally are similarly documented by their respective countries, the U.S. merchant marine assigns such duties to the chief steward in the overall rank and command structure of which pursers are not positionally represented or rostered. Imperial Airways of the United Kingdom had cabin boys, or stewards. In the 1920s, in the U.S., Stout Airways was the first to employ stewards in 1926. Working on four trimotor planes between Detroit and Grand Rapids, Michigan. Western Airlines were the first U.S. carriers to employ stewards to serve food. 10-passenger Fokker aircraft used in the Caribbean had stewards in the era of gambling trips to Havana, Cuba from Key West, Florida. Lead flight attendants would in many instances also perform the role of purser, steward, or chief steward in modern aviation terminology. The first female flight attendant was a 25-year-old registered nurse named Ellen Church, hired by United Airlines in 1930. She also first envisioned nurses on aircraft. Other airlines followed suit, hiring nurses to serve as flight attendants, then called stewardesses, or air hostesses, on most of their flights. In the United States, the job was one of only a few in the 1930s to permit women, which, coupled with the Great Depression, led to large numbers of applicants for the few positions available. 2,000 women applied for just 43 positions offered by Transcontinental and Western Airlines. In December 1935, female flight attendants rapidly replaced male ones, and by 1936, they had all but taken over the role. They were selected not only for their knowledge but also for their physical characteristics. A 1936 New York Times article described the requirements. The girls who qualify for hostesses must be petite, weight 100 to 118 pounds, height 5 feet to 5 feet 4 inches, age 20 to 26 years. Add to that the rigid physical examination each must undergo 4 times every year, and you are assured of the bloom that goes with perfect health. 3 decades later, a 1966 New York Times classified ad for stewardesses at Eastern Airlines listed these requirements. A high school graduate, single, 20 years of age, 5 feet 2 inches but no more than 5 feet 9 inches. Weight 105 to 135 in proportion to height and have at least 20/40ths vision without glasses. Appearance was considered as one of the most important factors to become a stewardess. At that time, airlines believed that the exploitation of female sexuality would increase their profits. Thus the uniforms of female flight attendants were often form-fitting, complete with white gloves and high heels. In the United States, they were required to be unmarried and were fired if they decided to wed. The requirement to be a registered nurse on an American airline was relaxed as more women were hired, and disappeared almost entirely during World War II as many nurses joined military nurse corps. Ruth Carroll Taylor was the first African American flight attendant in the United States. Hired in December 1957. On February 11, 1958, Taylor was the flight attendant on a Mohawk Airlines flight from Ithaca to New York, the first time such a position had been held by an African American. She was let go within 6 months as a result of Mohawk's then common marriage ban. The U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's first complainants were female flight attendants. Complaining